I'll be honest, this story still hurts to tell because I did not lose one person that night. I lost two. My best friend slept with my husband while I was pregnant, and the worst part was not even catching them in the guest room at 2 in the morning. The worst part was realizing how long I had been standing inside their lie without knowing it. My name is Rachel, and at the time this happened, I was 34 years old, 5 months pregnant, and still foolish enough to believe that the people closest to me would never be the ones to destroy me. I had a quiet life in a small suburb outside Charlotte, the kind of life that looked ordinary from the street and safe from the inside. A house with pale blue shutters, a husband who kissed my forehead before work, and a best friend who had a key to the front door because I trusted her that much. Her name was Lily. We had known each other since we were 12, which meant she had been there for nearly every version of me. She knew the awkward girl with braces, the college version who thought cheap wine counted as dinner, the heartbroken version after my first real breakup, and the woman I became when I married Mark. In my mind, Lily was not just a friend. She was part of the architecture of my life, something so familiar and permanent that I never thought to question whether it could collapse. Mark had been my husband for 5 years. Our marriage was not perfect, but I believed it was honest, and at that time, honesty felt more important than perfection. We argued about normal things like money, his late nights at work, my habit of overthinking everything, and whether we should renovate the kitchen before or after the baby came. None of it felt dangerous. None of it felt like the beginning of an ending. When I found out I was pregnant, Mark cried. I mean real tears, not the polite misty-eyed reaction men sometimes perform when they know they should feel something big. He held the pregnancy test in both hands, stared at it like it was a miracle he was afraid to touch, and then pulled me into his arms so tightly I could barely breathe. This is everything I've ever wanted, he whispered against my hair. And I believed him. That is the part one keep coming back to, even now. I believed him because he sounded like a man who meant it. Lily was the first person I told after him, because of course she was. She screamed so loudly over the phone that I had to pull it away from my ear, and 20 minutes later she was on my porch with a grocery bag full of ginger tea, crackers, prenatal vitamins, and a tiny yellow onesie that said worth the wait. She hugged me for almost a full minute. Then she touched my stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet, and said, "This baby is going to be so loved." Back then, that sentence made me cry. Later, I would remember it and feel sick. Because Lily really did become part of everything. She came to appointments when Mark could not leave work, helped me compare car seats online, and stayed up with me during those strange pregnancy nights when my body was exhausted, but my mind refused to sleep. She made herself useful in the exact way lonely people are grateful for, and because pregnancy can make you feel isolated even when you are surrounded, I let her in deeper than ever. At first, I thought I was lucky. My husband was busy, my body was changing, and my best friend was showing up when I needed someone. That was the story I told myself, and for a while, it was easy to believe. But somewhere around the second trimester, small things began to shift. Mark started working later, but not in a way dramatic enough to accuse him of anything. He would come home tired, distracted, smelling faintly of the office soap from the bathroom at his building, and he would kiss me quickly before checking his phone. Lily started coming over more often around that same time, usually with some excuse that sounded thoughtful enough to make questioning it feel rude. "You shouldn't be alone so much," she told me one evening while setting takeout containers on my kitchen counter. "Mark's busy, and you need people around you." I remember smiling at her because I wanted that to be love. Maybe it was, in some twisted way. Or maybe love was just the costume she used to enter my home. The first real warning sign was their comfort around each other. It was subtle, and that made it easy to ignore. They had inside jokes that seemed to appear overnight, quick glances that ended the moment I looked up, and conversations that changed direction when I walked into the room. Once, I came back from the bathroom and found them standing too close by the sink, both laughing at something neither of them could explain when I asked. Mark said, "You had to be there." Lily smiled too quickly and added, "It was nothing." Nothing. That word became a little room they kept locking me out of. Still, I explained it away because the truth felt too ugly to even consider. This was my husband and my best friend, not some woman from his office, not a stranger at a hotel bar. Lily, the girl who knew my mother's funeral dress, my worst secrets, my favorite childhood cereal, and the exact song I wanted played if I ever got brave enough to renew my vows one day. There was no way. Not them. Not together. Then came the night that ended my old life. I had not felt well that evening. My back ached, my stomach felt tight, and I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open during dinner. Lily had come over again, this time with soup and a bag of baby clothes she said she found on clearance, and Mark had been unusually quiet while she showed me tiny socks and folded blankets across the couch. Around 10, I told them I was going to bed. Mark kissed my cheek and said he would stay up to finish some work. Lily squeezed my hand and said, "Don't worry, I'll head out soon." I nodded because I trusted both of them. That sentence sounds so simple now, but it is the part that still burns. I trusted both of them. A few hours later, I woke in the dark with my heart already pounding, even though I did not know why. The bedroom was silent, the air felt too still, and the space beside me was empty. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. Mark was not in bed. At first, I told myself it was nothing, because pregnant women wake up all the time for no reason. Maybe he was downstairs answering emails. Maybe he had fallen asleep on the couch. Maybe Lily had left hours ago, and I was letting hormones turn ordinary things into shadows. But something in me did not believe that. I got out of bed carefully, one hand on my stomach, and walked down the hallway without turning on the light. The house felt different at night, almost unfamiliar, with the furniture reduced to shapes and the floorboards sounding louder under my feet than they should have. Then I saw it. The guest room door was not closed. A thin line of warm light spilled across the hallway floor, and from inside the room, I heard a whisper. Then another. His voice. Her voice. Close enough that my body understood before my mind allowed the thought to finish. I stood outside that door for 1 second, maybe 2, and in that tiny stretch of time, my whole life held its breath. Then I pushed it open, and everything I believed in collapsed without making a sound. For a few seconds after I opened that door, nobody moved, and the silence in that guest room felt so thick that I could hear my own breathing before I could understand what I was seeing. Mark turned toward me first, and the look on his face told me everything before his mouth ever opened. It was not confusion, and it was not the shock of an innocent man being misunderstood. It was panic, raw and immediate, the kind people show only when the truth has caught them before they had time to dress it up. Lily was beside him, sitting too close on the edge of the bed, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her face drained of color. She looked at me like she had suddenly remembered who I was, which somehow hurt more than if she had looked guilty from the beginning. I did not scream. That still surprises me when I think about it, because I always imagined betrayal would turn me into someone loud. I thought I would throw something, collapse, demand answers, or cry so hard I could not speak. But in that moment, my body chose stillness, as if it knew one wrong movement might make everything inside me shatter at once. Mark stood up too quickly, and Lily pulled her sweater around herself like modesty could somehow fix what I had already seen. "Rachel," he said, and my name sounded strange in his mouth. I stared at him, then at her, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was looking at two strangers wearing the faces of people I loved. The room smelled like his cologne and her perfume, mixed together in a way that made my stomach twist, and behind them the little lamp on the nightstand gave everything a soft golden glow that felt almost insulting. "Don't," I said before either of them could start. Mark froze with one hand halfway raised, like he had been about to reach for me. Lily opened her mouth, then closed it again, and that tiny movement told me she already knew there was no sentence strong enough to save her. I placed one hand against the doorframe because my legs felt unsteady, and with my other hand I held my stomach, not dramatically, not even consciously, but because my baby was the only real thing left in that hallway. "How long?" I asked. My voice was calm, almost flat, and I watched that calmness frighten them more than any screaming would have. Maybe they expected rage because rage would have given them something to react to. Instead, They got a question, and questions are dangerous when the answer is already rotten. Mark looked at Lily first. That one glance was enough to cut me open again. Even caught, even exposed, he still looked at her before answering me. How long? I repeated, and this time my voice was lower. Mark swallowed. A few weeks. A few weeks. The words entered me slowly, not like a slap, but like poison moving through water. A few weeks meant messages, choices, closed doors, and moments where they had sat beside me while I talked about baby names and swollen ankles, and the tiny flutter I thought I felt after breakfast. A few weeks meant this was not one terrible night. It was a private life they had been building underneath mine. I looked at Lily then, and she immediately dropped her eyes. Did you come over to help me? I asked, or did you come over to be near him? Her face crumpled, but she did not answer quickly enough. That pause became an answer of its own. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. The sentence was so small and useless that for a second I almost laughed, because people always say they never wanted to hurt you after they have already chosen the exact path that would. She had stood in my kitchen, folded baby clothes on my couch, and pressed her hand against my stomach while carrying a secret that would have destroyed me if I had not found it myself. You knew I was pregnant, I said. Lily began crying then, quietly at first, with one hand covering her mouth as if the sound of her own guilt embarrassed her. Mark stepped toward me, but I lifted my hand just enough to stop him. Do not come closer, I said. He stopped immediately, and I saw something shift in his face when he realized I meant it. This was not the beginning of a fight he could talk his way through. This was the moment distance entered our marriage and locked the door behind itself. I made a mistake, he said. That was the first thing that made anger finally rise in me. Not hot anger, not the kind that makes you scream, but a cold anger that sharpened every thought in my head. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how many times he had practiced making betrayal sound smaller than it was. No, I said. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, Mark. A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway. This was not a mistake. This was time. His eyes filled with tears, and somehow that made me feel nothing. You don't understand, he said. I understand perfectly, I replied, and I hated how steady I sounded. You both waited until I was tired, pregnant, and trusting enough to go to bed early. Lily flinched like I had struck her. Good, I thought, and then hated myself for thinking it. For one brief second, the room blurred, and I had to hold the doorframe harder. My stomach tightened, not painfully, but enough to remind me that I was not alone inside my own body. That was the thought that saved me from falling apart in front of them. I was not alone. I had someone to protect now, even if that someone was still small enough to be hidden beneath my hand. Mark said my name again, softer this time, the way he used to say it when he wanted me to forgive him after an argument. But that voice no longer belonged to safety. It belonged to the man who had been whispering behind a half-open door with my best friend. I was going to tell you, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. When? He did not answer. The silence after that question was the ugliest thing in the room. There had been no plan, no honesty waiting around the corner, no brave confession they were building toward. There had only been delay, secrecy, and the quiet hope that I would stay blind long enough for them to figure out what kind of lie came next. I nodded slowly because suddenly everything became painfully clear. Then I turned around and walked back down the hallway without giving either of them permission to follow me. I heard Mark say something behind me, but his voice sounded far away, like it belonged to another house. I entered our bedroom, closed the door gently, and stood in the dark beside the bed we had shared for 5 years. Same room, same dresser, same wedding photo on the wall. But nothing belonged to me anymore. I sat on the edge of the mattress, placed both hands over my stomach, and finally felt the first tear slide down my face. Then the bedroom door opened slowly behind me. The bedroom door opened slowly behind me, and I knew it was Mark before I heard him say my name. He did not come in like a husband who still belonged in that room. He came in carefully, almost quietly, as if the floor itself might reject him if he moved too fast. I kept sitting on the edge of the bed with both hands resting over my stomach, staring at the wedding photo on the dresser because looking at him felt impossible. Rachel, he said again, and this time his voice cracked in the middle. I did not answer. There are moments when silence is not weakness, and that was one of them. I had spent 5 years answering him, explaining myself to him, making room for his moods and his excuses and his late nights. But after what I had just seen, I could not give him even one more soft place to land. He stood near the door for a few seconds before stepping farther into the room. Please, he said. Just talk to me. I turned my head slightly, but I still did not look at him. There is nothing to talk about. That's not true, he said quickly. There is so much to talk about. The desperation in his voice almost sounded real, and maybe it was real, but it had arrived too late to matter. He had not been desperate when he let Lily stay after I went to bed. He had not been desperate when he closed himself inside that guest room with her. He only sounded desperate now because he had been seen. That difference mattered. You should go sleep somewhere else, I said. He looked stunned, as if the sentence had surprised him more than his own betrayal. Rachel, come on, he whispered. You can't make decisions like this tonight. I finally turned toward him then, because something about those words cut through the numbness. I can't make decisions tonight? He swallowed. You know what I mean. No, I said, keeping my voice low because I was too tired for volume. I know exactly what you mean. You mean I should wait until you find a way to make this smaller? His face changed, and for 1 second I saw anger hiding behind the fear. It disappeared quickly, but not before I caught it. That was another little truth, another piece of the man beneath the husband I thought I knew. I messed up, he said, rubbing both hands over his face. I know I messed up, but it didn't mean what you think it meant. I looked at him for a long time. The room felt too familiar around us, and that made everything worse. His watch was still on the nightstand. His sweatshirt was hanging over the chair. The baby book Lily had bought me was sitting open beside the lamp, bookmarked at a chapter about preparing emotionally for motherhood. I almost laughed when I saw it. Not because anything was funny, but because life can be cruel in such organized ways. You keep saying you messed up, I said. But this was not one bad choice made in 1 week moment. Mark opened his mouth, but I kept going before he could interrupt. This was time, Mark. This was planning, hiding, lying, and letting me sit downstairs with her while both of you knew what was happening behind my back. He looked down at the carpet, and the shame on his face finally appeared close to honest. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. That is what Lily said. He flinched at her name, and that flinch told me something I hated needing to know. Even now, even here, she was not just a mistake to him. She was someone with weight. Someone who could make him react. Is she still here? I asked. He hesitated. The hesitation was short, but it was enough to make my stomach turn. Yes, he said. Of course she was still there. She had not run from the house she had helped poison. She was somewhere downstairs or in the hall, crying into her hands, waiting to see whether I would become angry enough to make her feel punished or broken enough to make her feel forgiven. Tell her to leave, I said. Mark nodded too quickly. Okay. No, I said, stopping him before he moved. Do not tell her I need space. Do not tell her I am upset. Tell her to leave my house. He stared at me then, and I think that was the first moment he understood I was not speaking from shock anymore. Something in me had moved past disbelief and landed in a colder place, one where every word had a purpose. He left the room without arguing. A few minutes later, I heard voices downstairs. His was low and urgent, while hers broke apart in little pieces I refused to understand. Then the front door opened, and after a pause that felt longer than it should have, it closed again. Just like that, Lily was gone. But nothing felt lighter. Mark came back upstairs and stood in the doorway like a man returning to a courtroom. She's gone, he said. I nodded once, then stood up slowly because my body felt heavier than it had an hour before. I walked to the closet, took my overnight bag from the top shelf, and set it on the bed. Mark's eyes widened. What are you doing? I opened the first drawer and began folding clothes with hands that were steadier than I expected. I am leaving. Rachel, please don't do this. I placed a sweater into the bag, then reached for my documents from the drawer beside the bed. You already did this. He stepped closer, but stopped when I looked up. For the first time that night, fear moved across his face without any performance attached to it. He was not afraid of my pain. He was afraid of consequence. And then, from somewhere outside, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with Lily's name. Mark saw it at the same time I did. Under her name was one message. Please don't leave yet. There's something else you need to know. I stared at Lily's message for a long moment, and somehow those 9 words made the room feel even colder than the guest room had. Mark saw it too, because his face changed before I even picked up the phone. Until that second, he had looked terrified of losing me, but now there was something else behind his eyes. It was sharper than fear, closer to dread, like Lily had just reached for a secret he had been hoping would stay buried a little longer. What does she mean? I asked. Mark looked away. That was the wrong reaction. A guilty man can cry, apologize, beg, and still leave you with questions, but when a man looks away before answering, your body understands that another door is about to open. I don't know, he said, but his voice was too careful. I held the phone tighter and felt the baby shift faintly inside me, a small movement that pulled me back into myself. I was standing in my own bedroom, wearing a sleep shirt that barely fit over my stomach, while my husband watched me like I was holding evidence instead of a message from the woman he had betrayed me with. Do not lie to me again, I said. He closed his eyes for a second, and that tiny pause almost broke something in me. Not because I still expected honesty, but because I realized he was deciding which version of the truth would hurt him least. Rachel, please, he whispered. You're pregnant, and this is too much for tonight. I laughed once, quietly, because the concern in his voice felt obscene. He had not protected me from the betrayal, but now he wanted to protect me from the details. He had not thought about my stress when he was sneaking around with my best friend, but suddenly my pregnancy was convenient enough to use as a shield. No, I said. You do not get to decide what I can handle. Before he could answer, the phone buzzed again. Another message from Lily. Ask him about the money. For a moment, I did not understand it. The money. Not the affair. Not what happened. Not how long. The money. I looked up at Mark, and every bit of color had drained from his face. That was when I knew this was not just betrayal anymore. This was something planned. What money? I asked. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What money, Mark? He sat down on the edge of the bed, the same bed where I had imagined bringing our baby home, and rubbed his hands over his face like a man already defeated. He looked smaller in that moment, not sorry, not redeemed, just exposed. It was only once, he said. I blinked at him. The money was only once? He nodded, and the movement looked pathetic. How much? I asked. Rachel, it wasn't like that. How much? He swallowed hard. 8,000. The number moved through me slowly. $8,000. That was almost the exact amount missing from the savings account we had been building for the baby. The same account Mark had told me needed to stay untouched because hospital bills would come fast, because diapers were expensive, because we needed to be responsible now that our family was growing. I thought about the nursery furniture I had decided not to buy yet. I thought about the crib I had left in my online cart. I thought about him sitting beside me at the kitchen table, telling me we should wait before spending too much, while he had already handed money to Lily. My voice came out quieter than I expected. You gave my best friend $8,000? Mark looked up quickly. It wasn't for her like that. I stared at him, because there are moments when stupidity sounds almost violent. Then what was it for? His eyes filled again, but tears had lost all meaning by then. She said she was in trouble. I felt the room tilt slightly. What kind of trouble? He hesitated, and I knew before he said it that whatever came next would make the affair look even uglier. She said she might be pregnant. The words landed so softly that, for a second, I thought I had misheard him. Then the meaning opened beneath my feet. Lily. Pregnant. Money from my husband. While I was carrying his child. I gripped the dresser to steady myself because my knees suddenly felt unreliable. Mark stood as if he wanted to help me, but I looked at him once and he stopped moving. Was she? I asked. He shook his head, but too slowly. She said later that she wasn't sure. That is not what I asked. He looked at the floor. I don't know. That answer was worse than yes. It meant he had given her money without knowing the truth. It meant there had been enough between them for Lily to make that claim and for Mark to believe it might be possible. It meant that while I was choosing baby names and taking prenatal vitamins, my husband had been paying my best friend to make a problem disappear. I unlocked my phone with shaking fingers and called Lily. Mark said my name, but I ignored him. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear her crying before she spoke. "Rachel," she whispered. "Were you pregnant?" There was silence on the line. Not shock. Not confusion. Silence. The kind that admits more than words can. "I thought I was," she said finally. I closed my eyes, and a wave of nausea moved through me so hard I had to sit down. "And the money?" She started sobbing harder. I panicked. "No," I said, and my voice was steadier than hers deserved. "You came into my house, touched my stomach, smiled at my baby clothes, and took money from my husband because you thought you were carrying his child." Lily did not answer. Mark did not speak. The whole room seemed to hold its breath around me. Then Lily said something so quietly I almost missed it. "He told me he loved me." I looked at Mark, and for the first time that night, he looked truly afraid. Not afraid of losing me. Afraid of being known. And that was the moment I understood the betrayal had never been a mistake, never been confusion, and never been only physical. It had been a second life, built right next to mine. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to Lily cry, while Mark watched me from across the room like he was waiting for a verdict he already knew he deserved. For a moment, nobody spoke, and that silence felt almost worse than the confession itself. The affair had already broken something in me, but the money changed the shape of the betrayal. It made it practical. It made it planned. It made every late-night whisper and every nervous glance feel connected to something much larger than desire. "He told me he loved me," Lily said again, softer this time, as if repeating it might make it sound less pathetic. I looked at Mark, and he did not even try to deny it fast enough. That delay was another confession. "You told her you loved her?" I asked. He closed his eyes, and the exhaustion on his face looked almost theatrical, like he was tired of being caught more than tired of what he had done. "Rachel, I said things I shouldn't have said." Lily made a small sound through the phone, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "No," she whispered. "You said them every time you came over." My hand tightened around the phone. Every time. Those two words opened a new hallway in my mind, and every door inside it led somewhere ugly. I thought about evenings when Mark said he was working late, mornings when Lily arrived with coffee and smiled too brightly, weekends when she knew details about his schedule before I did. I thought about the way she had moved through my house, comfortable and helpful, while carrying pieces of my marriage in her pocket. "This is insane," I said quietly. And I meant it. Not dramatic insane. Not movie scene insane. The real kind, where your life suddenly stops obeying logic, and the people you trusted begin sounding like strangers reading lines from a script you never agreed to be in. Mark took a step toward me. "Hang up the phone." I looked at him slowly. "You do not get to tell me what to do anymore." His jaw tightened, and for the first time that night, I saw the part of him he had always kept polished away from me. The controlling part. The part that had believed I would be too pregnant, too emotional, or too scared to stand my ground. Lily was still crying, but her voice had changed. There was less guilt in it now and more desperation, like she understood that if I hung up, Mark would control the story again. "He said he was going to leave after the baby," she said. My body went cold. Not because I believed her completely, but because Mark's face changed before I could even process the words. He looked at her name on my screen like it was a loaded weapon. I stared at him. "After my baby was born?" "Rachel," he said, shaking his head. "That is not what I meant." "What did you mean then?" He looked trapped. And that was when I realized how many times women are asked to survive sentences that begin with "that is not what I meant." Men say it when the meaning becomes inconvenient. They say it when the truth finally reaches the person it was meant to hurt. Lily spoke again, and her voice was smaller now. "He told me he couldn't leave while you were pregnant because it would make him look horrible." The room seemed to tilt around me. That was the line that broke through whatever numbness had been protecting me. Not because he had cheated. Not because he had lied. Not even because he had given her money from the savings account meant for our child. It was because, in his private world with her, my pregnancy had not been sacred. It had not been beautiful. It had not been something he wanted to protect. It had been an obstacle to his image. I placed one hand over my stomach and breathed through the pressure rising in my chest. "You were waiting," I said to him. He shook his head quickly. "No." I was confused. "You were waiting for the right time to abandon me and still look like a decent man." He did not answer. He did not have to. Lily whispered my name, but I could not listen to her anymore. She had given me pieces of the truth, but that did not make her safe. A person can expose a fire and still be the one who lit it. "Do you have messages?" I asked. Mark's head snapped toward me. Lily went silent. "Rachel," Mark said carefully, "don't turn this into something uglier." I almost smiled at that because the ugliness was already here. It was sitting on my bed, standing in my doorway, crying through my phone, and hiding in the bank account where $8,000 had disappeared. "Do you have messages?" I repeated. Lily inhaled shakily. "Yes." Mark swore under his breath. That was enough. "Send them to me," I said. "Rachel, please," Mark said, and his voice finally cracked in a way that sounded real. "You don't want to read those tonight." I looked at him, and for the first time since opening the guest room door, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt protection. Not for him. Not for our marriage. For myself, and for the child moving quietly beneath my hand. "You are right," I said. "I probably don't want to read them tonight, but I need to." Lily stayed quiet for a few seconds, then said, "I'll send them." I ended the call before either of them could say anything else. The first screenshot arrived less than a minute later. Then another. Then 5 more. I did not open them immediately. I just watched them appear on my screen, one after another, like evidence falling into my lap. Mark sat down on the bed and covered his face with both hands, and that was the first time he looked completely defeated. Not sorry. Defeated. I opened the first screenshot. It was from Mark. "Once the baby comes, I'll figure out the cleanest way to leave. I just need her calm until then." I read it once. Then again. The words did not make me cry. They made me stand up. I walked to the closet, took my bag from the bed, and began packing with a calm that felt almost unnatural. Mark said my name several times, but every time he spoke, I folded another piece of clothing. I packed my documents, my prenatal records, my laptop, my charger, and the small yellow onesie Lily had bought me before I knew what kind of woman she really was. Then I stopped, held the onesie in my hands for a moment, and placed it back on the dresser. I did not want anything from her touching my child. Mark watched me do it, and something in his face collapsed. "Where are you going?" he asked. I zipped the bag. "Somewhere you cannot manage me." He stood up. "You can't just leave in the middle of the night." I looked at him one last time. "I can, Mark. You just never thought I would." Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Lily. It was a fraud alert from our bank. Someone had just tried to move the rest of our savings. The fraud alert stayed on my screen while Mark and I stared at it from opposite sides of the bedroom, and for one strange second, I almost forgot how to breathe. Someone had just tried to move the rest of our savings. Not some small amount that could be explained away as a bill or a mistake, but almost everything we had set aside for the baby. It was the money for the crib, the hospital deductible, the unpaid maternity leave I was afraid to talk about too much, and the quiet little safety net I thought we had built together. Mark saw the alert at the same time I did, and the look on his face told me he already knew where my mind had gone. "Rachel, I didn't do that," he said too quickly. I looked at him, holding the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. "Then who did?" He opened his mouth, then stopped, because even he understood there was no good answer. If he said Lily, it meant she had access to more than my home and my husband. If he said he had no idea, it meant he expected me to believe another impossible coincidence in the worst hour of my life. I pressed the bank's number before he could say anything else. Mark took a step toward me, but I lifted my hand and made him stop without raising my voice. I had never felt that kind of authority before, not in my marriage, not in that house, and maybe not even in myself. It did not feel like confidence. It felt like survival becoming organized. The bank representative answered after 2 minutes that felt like 20. I verified my name, my birthday, the last 4 digits of my social security number, and the security code sent to my phone, all while Mark stood there watching me like the floor was disappearing under him. When I asked about the transfer, the woman's tone became careful in that professional way people use when they know the information is going to hurt. She told me the transfer had been attempted from Mark's login. The money was going to a newly linked external account. The account had been added earlier that week. I closed my eyes because I already knew, but I still asked, "Whose account?" There was a pause. Then she said, "The name listed is Lillian Parker." Lily's full name. The room went so quiet that I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling fan above us. Mark whispered my name, but I barely heard it. Something inside me had gone very still, not because the pain was gone, but because the shock had burned through everything soft. There was only the truth now, and the truth had become so clear it almost looked simple. "You were sending her the rest of our savings," I said. "No," Mark said, shaking his head hard. "I wasn't sending it to her for that. I was trying to move it somewhere safe." I stared at him because the lie was so insulting that it almost sounded childish. Safe from who? He looked away. That was the moment I understood. Safe from me. Not from bills. Not from hackers. Not from some imaginary emergency. He was trying to move our baby's money before I could protect it, because once he realized I had screenshots, proof, and a reason to leave, he stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like a man trying to control the damage. I told the bank representative to freeze the account. Mark finally reacted then. "Rachel, don't do that," he said, and his voice came out sharper than before. I looked at him while the woman on the phone explained the next steps, and for the first time, I felt real fear of the man I had married. Not because I thought he would hit me. Mark was too polished for that. Too careful with the image he had spent years building. I was afraid because I saw how quickly love could become strategy when money was involved. After the call ended, I placed my phone in my bag, along with the printed folder of prenatal records from my nightstand. Mark stood between me and the door. Not directly enough to look threatening. Just enough to remind me that I would have to walk around him. "Move," I said. His face softened instantly, like he remembered which mask worked best on me. "Please don't leave like this. We need to calm down before this becomes something we can't take back." I almost laughed because he still thought the disaster was something we were creating together. He still did not understand that the line had already been crossed in the guest room, in the messages, in the bank account, and in every quiet moment where I had trusted them both. "You tried to take the money meant for our child," I said. He swallowed, and for once he had no sentence ready. I stepped around him, walked down the hallway, and past the guest room without looking inside. That room no longer scared me. It was just the place where I finally saw what had already been true. When I reached the front door, Mark followed me with both hands lifted like he was approaching a frightened animal. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To a hotel tonight," I said. "Tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer." His expression changed at the word lawyer. That one word did what my tears could not. It made him understand that I was no longer asking him to be honest. I was preparing to protect myself from the man he had become. I drove away at 3:42 in the morning with my overnight bag in the back seat and my phone charging beside me, because every screenshot suddenly felt more valuable than anything I had packed. I checked into a small hotel near the interstate, the kind with bright lobby lights, tired carpet, and a front desk clerk who pretended not to notice I had been crying. When I closed the hotel room door behind me, the silence finally reached me. I sat on the edge of the bed, one hand on my stomach, and for the first time all night, I let myself whisper the words I had been avoiding. "We're safe." I said it for the baby, but I think I needed to hear it too. Then my phone buzzed again. I expected Mark. I expected Lily. Instead, it was my mother, who never texted that late unless something was wrong. Her message made my blood turn cold. "Rachel, why is Mark asking if you're mentally okay?" My mother's message sat on my phone like a warning, and for a few seconds I just stared at it, sitting on the edge of that hotel bed with my overnight bag, still half open on the floor. "Rachel, why is Mark asking if you're mentally okay?" I read it once, then again, and the longer I looked at it, the clearer everything became. Mark had not followed me to the hotel because he had already chosen a smarter way to chase me. He was not trying to win me back anymore. He was trying to get ahead of the truth before I could tell anyone what he had done. My hands started shaking, but this time it was not from heartbreak. It was from fury. I called my mother immediately, and she answered on the first ring, which told me she had been sitting there with her phone in her hand, waiting for me to explain why my husband had suddenly become so worried about my state of mind in the middle of the night. "Rachel," she said, and her voice was already tight. "Mom, what did he tell you?" There was a pause, and I could hear the television playing softly in the background at her house. That ordinary sound nearly broke me, because less than an hour earlier I had been in my own bedroom learning that my husband had given my best friend money from our baby savings, and now my mother was being pulled into his version of the story before I could even breathe. "He said you left the house very upset," she said carefully. "He said you found some messages, misunderstood them, and then started acting like everyone was against you." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not a full lie. Something worse. A shaped truth. He had taken my pain, shaved off his betrayal, and left behind a version where I sounded unstable, emotional, pregnant, overwhelmed. The kind of woman people speak to gently while quietly doubting every word she says. "What else?" I asked. My mother hesitated, and that hesitation scared me more than the answer. "He said he was worried about the baby," she whispered. I stood up so fast the mattress shifted behind me. Of course he said that. Of course he dragged the baby into it, because if he could make my leaving look dangerous instead of necessary, then my protection would start to look like recklessness. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." And then I told her. Not everything, because there was too much and my body was still trying to survive the first night of knowing it. But I told her enough. I told her I walked in on Mark and Lily in the guest room. I told her Lily had sent messages proving the affair had been going on for weeks. I told her Mark had moved $8,000 from our savings and that someone had tried to move the rest into Lily's account after I found out. My mother did not interrupt once. That was how I knew she believed me. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was so heavy I had to sit back down. Then she said, "Send me the screenshots." Those 5 words steadied me more than any comfort could have. She did not ask me if I was sure. She did not tell me to calm down. She did not make me defend my own sanity while my marriage was still bleeding out in front of me. She just asked for proof, and I had it. I sent her everything. The messages from Lily. The bank alert. The screenshot where Mark wrote that he needed me calm until after the baby came. I sent it all while sitting under the yellow hotel lamp, feeling like I was building a wall one piece of evidence at a time. My mother called back 2 minutes later, and her voice had changed. It was colder now. "Do not go back to that house tonight," she said. "I'm not. Do not meet him alone." "I won't." And Rachel, "Yeah, you call a lawyer first thing in the morning." That was when I finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a few quiet tears that came because someone had placed their hand on my side of the table and believed me without making me earn it. By sunrise, Mark had called 26 times. He had left voicemails, sent texts, and emailed me twice, each message sounding slightly different from the last. First, he was sorry. Then he was scared. Then he was angry. Then he was concerned. By 7 in the morning, he had moved completely into the version where he was a husband trying to protect his pregnant wife from making a mistake she would regret. That shift told me everything I needed to know. A man who is truly sorry does not start building a case against you before breakfast. I called a lawyer at 8:04. Her name was Denise, and she had the calmest voice I had ever heard. I explained the affair, the pregnancy, the money, and the attempt to make me sound unstable to my family. She listened without rushing me, asked for the documents, and then said something I did not know I needed to hear. "You are not overreacting. You are responding to a pattern." A pattern. That word changed something in me. Because until then, I had been seeing each betrayal as a separate wound. The guest room. The messages. The money. The call to my mother. But Denise saw what I was too close to see. Mark was not panicking randomly. He was controlling the story, the money, and the witnesses. After we hung up, I blocked Lily. Then I sent Mark one message. Do not contact me directly again. Everything goes through my lawyer. He replied less than 30 seconds later. You're making this ugly. I looked at the screen and felt a strange calm move through me. No, I thought. He had made it ugly. I was only refusing to keep it hidden. That afternoon, my mother came to the hotel with clean clothes, soup I could barely eat, and the kind of face mothers wear when they are trying not to fall apart before their daughters do. She hugged me carefully because of the baby, then held me longer than either of us expected. For the first time since opening that guest room door, I felt safe enough to be tired. Then, while my mother was folding my clothes into the tiny hotel dresser, my phone buzzed with an email from Denise. She had found something in the bank records I had sent. The linked external account under Lily's name had not been added that week like the bank representative first told me. It had been added 6 weeks earlier. And 6 weeks earlier was exactly when Mark started working late. When Denise told me the account had been linked 6 weeks earlier, the final piece of the story clicked into place so clearly that I almost felt calm. For weeks, Mark had not simply been falling into something messy with Lily. He had been building an exit, protecting money, shaping witnesses, and keeping me peaceful enough to stay useful until he decided what version of his life would cost him the least. That realization hurt differently from the affair itself. The affair broke my heart, but the planning made me feel hunted. My mother sat beside me on the hotel bed while I read Denise's email again, and I remember how carefully she took the phone from my hand when she saw my face. She did not tell me to breathe, and she did not tell me everything would be okay, because mothers know when comfort would sound like a lie. She only placed her hand over mine and said, "Now we protect you." Those words became the beginning of my new life. By the next afternoon, Denise had filed the first emergency paperwork to protect the remaining savings and document the attempted transfer. She told me not to meet Mark alone, not to discuss money by phone, and not to let anyone convince me that pregnancy made me unreliable. Every message he sent, every voicemail he left, every concerned text pretending to worry about my mental state became part of a folder that grew heavier by the hour. Mark hated that. Men like him can survive tears, arguments, and emotional confusion, but they hate records. They hate dates, screenshots, bank logs, and lawyers who turn private manipulation into organized evidence. 3 days later, he finally stopped begging and started blaming. He wrote that I was destroying our family. He wrote that I was letting Lily's lies poison my mind. He wrote that stress was bad for the baby, as if he had not created the stress with his own hands. I did not answer any of it. Not because I was strong every moment. Because Denise answered for me. That was one of the first things I learned after leaving him. Strength does not always feel like standing tall with your chin up. Sometimes strength is letting a professional send an email because your hands are shaking too hard to type one yourself. Lily tried reaching me only once more. She sent a long message from a new number, saying she was sorry, saying Mark had lied to her too, saying she had believed he loved her, and that she never meant to become the kind of woman who could do this to me. I read the message in the parking lot outside my doctor's office, with one hand resting on my stomach and the other holding the phone like it weighed more than it should. For a few seconds, I almost felt pity for her. Then I remembered her hand on my stomach. I remembered the baby clothes. I remembered her sitting beside me while carrying a secret that could have stolen the floor from under me at any moment. So I blocked that number too. Not angrily, cleanly. Sometimes closure is not a conversation. Sometimes closure is refusing to open the door again. I moved into a small apartment 2 weeks later, with help from my mother, my cousin, and a neighbor who never asked nosy questions. It was not beautiful at first. The walls were plain, the carpet was old, and the nursery was nothing more than a corner of my bedroom with a white crib I bought on sale. But the first night I slept there, I woke up at 3 in the morning and realized something strange. The silence did not scare me anymore. It belonged to me. Mark fought the divorce harder than I expected, mostly because losing control seemed to offend him more than losing me. He wanted shared narratives, careful language, and agreements that made his choices look softer than they were. Denise did not let him have that. The bank record stayed. The screenshot stayed. the messages stayed. And eventually, Mark understood that the story he wanted to tell could not survive the proof I had kept. By the time my daughter was born, he was no longer the center of anything. That surprised me most. I thought I would think of him during labor, but I barely did. I thought the pain of what happened would follow me into the delivery room and stand beside the bed like a ghost. Instead, when they placed my daughter on my chest, all I could think was that she was here, warm and real and untouched by the ugliness that came before her. I cried then, not for my marriage, not for Lily, not for the life I had lost. I cried because for the first time in months, something beautiful had arrived without lying to me. I named her Grace. Mark met her later through the arrangement Denise helped create, and I will not pretend that part was easy. There were rules, schedules, boundaries, and days when I had to swallow pain because my daughter deserved more peace than pride. But I never confused cooperation with forgiveness, and I never allowed his regret to become my responsibility. Lily left town before Grace was 3 months old. A mutual friend told me she had moved to Atlanta, though I never asked why and never cared enough to confirm it. Mark did not end up with her, which felt predictable in the saddest possible way. They had not built love. They had built escape, and escape rarely looks romantic once the damage has a receipt. Years later, people still ask me how I survived it. They expect me to say that time healed me, or motherhood saved me, or that losing them made me stronger. Those things are partly true, but they are not the whole truth. The real answer is quieter. I survived because one night, when my whole life collapsed, I chose not to protect the people who had betrayed me. I chose not to make their lies easier to carry. I chose my child, my sanity, my name, and the small voice inside me that said leaving was not destruction. It was rescue. And when I look back now, I do not think I lost everything. I lost a husband who loved his image more than his family. I lost a friend who confused access with loyalty. But I kept the one thing that mattered most. I kept myself. And every night when Grace falls asleep with her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I understand something I could not have understood before all of this. The life I have now is not the life I planned. It is the life I saved.